To be buried in the Irish Catholic tradition means something. The family plot, the wake, the burial, they all fit into a ritual that we as a nation are versed in from an early age. An lufasa le muintershe is an old Irish proposal, or in modern terms maybe more of a chat-up line. It means, how would you like to be buried with my people? And it's a particularly Irish sentiment to include your eternal resting place in their proposal of marriage or declaration of love. To be buried with your people is really important, and to be buried with my people indicates that you're going to leave your family and join mine. If it means something to be buried with your family, consequently it means something when you're not buried with them also. My people, my family. The family plot is within the eye line of my house here on the Ballysimon Road. I can see Mount St. Laura's Cemetery from the upstairs windows. It's a short walk, maybe 100 metres. In between is the space where my great-grandmother, Honora Keyes Ryan, was born. Her father was the custodian of the graveyard, a placement given to him when he was disowned by his own family for marrying a Catholic. Burial rites are governed in the Catholic tradition by canon law. This is a rule book set down by the Vatican that tells us who can be buried and where, and when there is to be an exception. Up until 1983, the list of people who were not allowed to be buried in a Catholic graveyard included the unbaptised stillborn children, murderers, lunatics, women who maybe baptised themselves but died in childbirth, still tainted with original sin and not having gone through the churching procedure. Of course, it was up to each parish to interpret this in its own way, and there was room for compassion. But sometimes that compassion was sadly lacking, and we find ourselves with community responses to that. Angel plots, an area just outside the main graveyard, not technically on consecrated ground, but close enough that the loved ones could feel some kind of comfort. The proximity to that eternal resting place, to that peace offered by a Catholic funeral. In other parts of the country, there were different responses. We see Killeen, pre-Christian pagan burial grounds, repurposed. People would often go there with their little shoebox, these little tiny remains, and place them into these places that predate this Catholic rule box. Up in Mayo, we sometimes see fairy forts. The tradition of fairy forts is a place where people would bury their unbaptised children. It keeps them alive in the community spirit, in the community sense. People know where they are. They're together. They're close by. We understand what this is for. We understand where they are, and that offers comfort to people. It's incredibly distressing to a community when someone is deliberately denied Catholic burial rites. From my research, I find that in the late 1840s, a young woman called Anya in the parish of Tyne in County Galway, she dies in the workhouse, the mother of 3 illegitimate children. On her deathbed, she's begging for a priest, and he denies her a Catholic funeral. Because she has had these children out of wedlock, he refuses for her to be allowed to be buried in the Catholic graveyard there. This community knowledge of this event continues, and in 1984, just after this canon law change comes into practice, when priests are allowed a little more compassion, the current priest in Tyne village orders that Anya's remains be exhumed and she be reinterred within the graveyard of the village. No remains were found, but they have this ceremonial burial for her, a righting of a 150-year-old wrong. There's a theatricality to it, a showmanship that's about speaking to the living and not to the dead. This is about laying this community's mind at peace. There's talk of the priests of the village being cursed, that they die young or that they don't last long within the community. That Anya's memory haunts this place because of this injustice. She's not allowed eternal peace. She's eternally unrestful. Of course, Galway is not the only place that these things occurred. In Kerry in 1946, A young woman from Listowel, unmarried, dies in childbirth. A local taximan had taken her from the house to the local hospital where she had been refused care because she was unmarried. On the return of her body to the village, the churchyard and local convent were locked up, the priest denying her access to them for her. An unmarried woman who dies in childbirth cannot be allowed a Catholic burial. An angry crowd of local men gather in the local square. They carry her coffin to the church and force open the gates. They demand the girl's remains be buried in consecrated ground. And at last the priest is dragged out to say the sacraments over her. As they put her into the grave they dig for her. This incident is immortalised in the play Solar Run by Tony Gearan, the son of the taximan who took the girl to the hospital that day in February 1946. In the Irish Catholic tradition, and indeed in our Western culture, picturing our loved ones sleeping eternally beneath the grass of a quiet rural graveyard is something that gives us peace in our daily life. We don't need to worry about them. We know where they are. They're with the others that have gone before them. They're safe, they're well, they're happy. Those images from New York of bodies in simple pine caskets stacked in a mass grave on Potter's Field on Ellis Island spoke to us of another time. They strike deeply. A time of famine when people weren't allowed their own funeral, their own grave, their own coffin even. Sometimes they were being reused. Again in Iran, in China there's talk of mass crematorium services where you're given a jar of ash but it may not necessarily be your loved ones. The same in Nicaragua now. Family members just disappeared, taken to hospital and never seen again. Mass burials in the dead of night, diggers, industrial equipment used for these. No service, no funerary, no religious rites offered. This is very frightening for us as a culture, and I think we've done well in this time to avoid those scenes in Ireland. But we have had significant disruption to our funeral rituals. When we look at the reports from the Irish Times and the Irish Independent, we see people say the same things and again. Not being able to say goodbye to their loved ones in the final hours, not being able to sit with them in wake, not being able to be comforted by loved ones with only 10 people maximum allowed at any one service. No funeral masses, going straight to the graveside. Sometimes the funeral directors and their staff having to wear PPE where that loved one has died of COVID-19. This is very frightening, and what it means in real psychological terms is that until we can go through the process, until we can follow the ritual to its end, in our post-COVID world, we need to figure out a way to either release ourselves from our attachment to physical funerary or to find a way as a community to reconcile this loss. Not just the loss of our loved ones, but the loss of our sense of security, our knowledge that we are safe in a world we have created and have control over. We can either, as the priest did in Tyne in rural Galway, reenact the righting of this wrong, hold ceremonial funerals for our loved ones, or, as in Listowel, rather than try to rewrite the wrong, we hold on to its memory by writing it into our literature. By telling the story over and over again on our stages, we make sure that we don't forget how important this moment is. Standing here now in this place, with the trees rustling and the birds cawing overhead, I'm struck by how peaceful it is, how calming it is for me to stand among my ancestors, to feel their presence, to be able to see them from my house, to know where they are, and to know that someday I will join them here.